Hello, everyone. This is Jordan Morrow, Global Head of Data Literacy here at Qlik. And I'm actually very, very excited to be hosting this LinkedIn Live today as I get to interview someone who actually hired me and interviewed me to start off my career here at Qlik. And so without further ado, let me welcome into this chat Kevin Hanegan, our Chief Learning Officer here at Qlik. And I'm very excited to be able to doing this. A funny story about when he interviewed me. He didn't realize that year I was growing a beard out to be Santa Claus for Halloween. So he never saw me in person until about 2 months before Halloween, and it was like this big. So welcome, Kevin. Why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll jump right into the topic at hand.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Really happy to be here. And again, role reversal. Right now, you get to interview me, so hopefully some softball questions. But excited to be here. As Jordan said, Chief Learning Officer of Qlik. Passion and background is between learning, data literacy, and psychology, and really excited to answer some questions about how we can, seize the opportunity with all the information and data available out there today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody knows that data is no longer a nice to have. I think COVID-19 showed that to us. We're living at a time when everything needs to be in front of us. So a little background on LinkedIn Live. If it's your first time or many times, join us in the chat session. Ask questions on the side of my screen. They're going to pop up for us. So I have my list of questions, but I would love to get questions from the listeners. I know Kevin has his Dunkin' Donuts coffee. I've got my water, so we are ready to roll. So Kevin, I am going to lob a softball right out there for you to start, and that is, tell us the name of the book that you wrote and why you wrote it. What was its purpose? Why did you bring this for people?
Yeah, and appreciate the softball. So the title is Turning Data into Wisdom. And as you mentioned, right, data is everywhere. We've seen all the charts about the massive amount of data. What I'm seeing is just like the spoken language and the written language, right? Data isn't lying, but it needs context to really be able to understand it. And sometimes that context means stepping outside of your comfort zone and getting diverse perspectives and really trying to challenge assumptions of the data. So not saying that more data is necessarily risky, but if it's not treated with a systemic approach, using the right combination of soft skills and hard skills to truly harness that data and turn it into wisdom, you are going to run into some challenges. So the book is meant to provide a systematic and systemic view of how you can go along that process, covering not just why you need a data and analytics strategy, but also the soft skills of being able to challenge assumptions and be able to work with a hypothesis and look at potential unconscious bias that might be at play.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of lob another one at you, but first, I'm seeing so many people from around the world. This is awesome. Thanks for joining, everybody. Another softball one. The field that we help pioneer is data literacy. And me being the chief nerd officer, as nerdy as they come, I love the field of data literacy, what it brings. What skills? So if you were to tell an individual right now, these are things to focus on, what skills would you say would be good to develop to make smarter decisions, to turn data into wisdom?
Yeah, I'll start at the individual level, and then we can extrapolate to the organizational. But for an individual, obviously, you could think of it as split between hard skills and soft skills. So on the hard skill side, we are not saying everyone needs to be a data scientist. In fact, we're saying quite the opposite. That is not true. You do have to have some basic math skills, right? Understanding data, being able to understand averages and standard deviations and how those apply. And those skills help you when you have a data scientist that's building out an algorithm and you need to be able to interpret the results. But the real key link to this is all the soft skills. So I mentioned systemic and systematic, and those are two of my favorite words. You have to have an enterprise thinking and a systems thinking approach when you're dealing with root cause analysis. You see a data point in time, and you need to understand, what is that data point telling you? Why is it telling you that? What other variables and factors are pushing on that data? If we want to make improvements, where do we make improvements? To do that, you need to have relationship building. You need to have active listening. You need to be able to think critically and challenge the data instead of just look at it blindly and say, here's my answer. So definitely a combination of soft and hard skills. At an organizational level, not everyone is going to have all of those things. So yeah, you would be helpful when you're dealing with data to have someone that's familiar with ETL, have someone who's familiar with being a data scientist skills. But at an organization, that all comes together in an organizational culture that supports going from data to wisdom and having all those skills at, an organizational level.
Absolutely. And it's one of those, I think organizations in today's day and age are really trying to be that data-informed, data-driven type organization. And they feel they've tried, but they've never really reached that ability. So we do have a question coming in from Julie. And this will tie into both the organizational and individual side. Are data-driven organizations less creative? I mean, does it get in the way? I have my answer to this, but go ahead and answer, and then I'll throw mine in there.
Yeah, as with everything, right? It depends on the context. So I would first say, how do you define a data-driven organization, right?
Yeah.
So one of the words I use for this is data-informed decision-making, because you could argue the letter of the law, data-driven means you're running with the data, but you're not marrying it with experiences of diverse perspectives, and you're not challenging assumptions. So I would argue if you're blindly doing data-driven, just letting the data lead you and not challenging it with those soft skills we mentioned, you potentially are not being as creative as you could be to understand what is the root cause, right? And think of, in a hospital scenario, you go to the doctor, you give them all your symptoms, they go through a chart to assess what it possibly could be. They start out with potentially 20 different things, from a cold to, something a lot more severe. And as you learn more, they're channeling down to what it potentially could be. If you're just blindly data-driven, you're going to skip that process. But if you're data-informed, which means you have data, let's give it a hypothesis, let's get diverse perspectives, let's challenge the assumptions, let's think systematically about what could be impacting that number, then that forces creativity, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that people forget when we look at data and analytics for far too long, and I think this is actually why we have a skills gap today, is it was all technical, go technical, source the data, everything. And then you find that 99% of a population in a workforce is not confident or comfortable with data literacy. So to me, you cannot lose the human element of all of this, right? Piggybacking with what you're saying here, that data literacy is to a T the human element of data and analytics, and we can't lose that. And that creativity actually dovetails into another question that just came in. When organizations, one of the biggest challenges I would say is the communication of data and being able to communicate effectively. And creativity lashes that in, it brings it in. So what are some challenges that organizations face, would you say, Kevin, when it comes with communicating with data?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, right? I think at the highest level, there's sometimes a misconception of who your stakeholders are. And you need to realize that each stakeholder has different needs, different what's in it for them. So communicating with data, you have to understand all the stakeholders, realize that the message may be different to them based off of their comfort level with data. So you might, as an analyst, come up with a decision, find some insights using potentially a complicated data visualization. That doesn't mean you share that data visualization with the stakeholder, right? They're not going to understand it. You have to be able to weave the emotional element of telling a story that gets at the hearts of what's in it for them. Why is this important? And unfortunately, we tend to treat it as a one size fits all, which it's not. Every stakeholder is different, upstream, downstream. And so it's part of the change management process, right? Is being able to take the data, tell a very clear story that resonates with the stakeholders, so they're bought in on it, as well as so that they understand, the change process.
Yeah, this communicating with data, I think people lose sight that effective communication, this ability to talk, matters. Data and analytics, I think they figure out, or they wonder why people aren't understanding it. I just built this great analysis. Why aren't people getting it? Well, are you a data scientist using really technical terms and the person doesn't understand it? Are you a data scientist trying to explain it to an executive and it took you an hour? An executive's going to kick you out of the room pretty quickly to do that. And so people need to understand that communication, these soft skills, I get asked to mentor and coach a lot of kids who are in their undergrad or graduate work or right out of college. And they're always like, well, I'll ask them, what program are you in? Data science, statistics. And they ask me what courses I should take, soft skills.
Absolutely.
Your program will teach you all you need to know about statistics and data science. Go learn how to communicate. Yep. Because if you can do that, it's going to help. So let me jump back. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add into that psychology too, because it's good to communicate, but if you don't understand how other people behave, you're not going to be able to properly communicate with them. So soft skills and psychology.
Absolutely. So there's a question in here from Qlik that I'm going to translate into your book a little bit here. It says, how to know what is the organizational data literacy index? Like, how do we assess it? Well, one of the things that you have to do before you run an organizational data literacy initiative, which will help data turn into wisdom, is you have to assess your workforce. But I'm going to dovetail that. Organizational executives struggle with assessing their workforce. They struggle from turning data into wisdom. What kind of roadblocks, Kevin, do you see come into play when an organization is not being successful in both data literacy, data to wisdom, all of these fronts?
Yeah, we'll start all the way downstream and work upstream. So at the foundational level, they might not have a clear data strategy. And the output of that would be that employees don't trust the data. They
Yep.
see a point in time and they're like, I don't believe it. Or potentially they're avoiding using the data because they don't trust it. So definitely that data strategy, governance, management. Above that, you need the analytics strategy, right? How are you going to turn data into wisdom? It's about extracting the value and the insights from there. And sometimes you are using, I wouldn't say complex algorithms, but you're using algorithms to look at descriptive statistics. You're drilling down into diagnostic analytics, and at some levels you're potentially using predictive modeling and prescriptive analytics. So you need the data and the analytics strategy, but then you need to marry it with a culture that is curious, that is collaborative, that is creative. It fosters failing, but failing really quick and learning from it. It fosters the diverse perspectives of what that data context means, so you can really understand the root cause. The worst case would be you see the data point, you're excited, you have a way to improve on it, but you're improving a symptom, you're not improving the root cause. And that becomes a huge challenge and a huge roadblock because you're not thinking systemically.
Yeah, well, it's one of those. I love to turn to an example of a tree, right? If you think about a tree and you see the leaves dying, would it make sense to go try and fix one leaf at a time? No, it's in the trunk and it's in the roots. But far too often what businesses are doing is they're fixing a leaf at a time, reacting, versus how do we build and fix this root to make it happen? So we have a great question from Justinas here. It says, what would be your approach in enhancing trust on sensitive data between company and a newcomer, data scientists, et cetera? How do you enhance trust, Kevin?
Yeah, well, I think the way you enhance trust is showing clearly to all of the stakeholders what's in it for them, what the process we're doing. Don't make it a black box. Us that are curious, right? We want people to be curious, and we tell them, don't look in there, it's a black box. We're inhibiting that curiosity, and we're not going to have trust. So being open and honest about what we're doing, sharing wins when we have them, but most importantly, sharing failures when we have them and learning from them. Being able to challenge assumptions. If I, as an employee, can challenge the data and challenge an assumption of how the data was created, I'm going to inherently have more trust in it.
Yeah, and I think that trust, make it solution-based, right? If you can put in front of somebody, this was our outcome based on the approach we took, and prove it out, having a library of solutions that worked and showing it to a person who says, I don't trust data. First off, it's you don't trust the manipulation of data. Data's just data. It's when you put it into the hands of people that issues come into play. Another great question coming up from Mackenzie O'Brien. What would you say to an executive who is making a gut decision or who likes to rely on their gut feel over using data? And I'll have my answer after yours here.
Yeah, really good question, Mackenzie. I guess I'd start by saying the way gut decisions work, somewhere in your brain, in your unconscious, you have had experiences and perspectives that led you to think of your gut decision, which means there are many times where it's coming from a valid base and it's actually the right answer. What we struggle with today is what existed and what was truth yesterday isn't necessarily truth today. The rate of change of the industry and the world as a whole is so fast that those beliefs become outdated, and our mental models don't match that into the pattern matching because we're not aware they're outdated. So I would say with a gut feeling, there's a reason, there's an experience why you said that. Just share it out loud and marry that with more of diverse perspectives. So make that your hypothesis, and then try to poke holes in it. Try to poke holes yourself. Try to play devil's advocate. Poke holes with a cognitively diverse perspective. And at the end of the day, just like doctors do, if they can't come up with another scenario, the most likely treatment is this, and then go forward and again learn from it. If it doesn't work, go back to the process and learn from it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think people think that gut feel needs to be removed at times. Gut feel does not need to be removed. We're trying to balance between the human experience and the data experience. And sometimes the data will outweigh the human, and sometimes the human will outweigh the data. But I think that people have this fear, we're just going to get rid of gut feel. We're going to get rid of an executive. Some of them have 30 or 40 years experience. And to tell them, don't use your experience is not going to help them in any way. What we're saying is let's enhance their experience with the data. You can't just do one or the other. You do that, you're going to have issues going through. A couple other questions. We're getting quite a few coming in. Thank you, everybody. From Nicholas, it says, we have a challenge receiving feedback on what works best for our end users. For example, what presentation is most clear and concise and understandable? Any advice, Kevin, that you would have to help this out other than brute force?
Yeah, really loaded question, Nicholas. I mean, you are now entering a world of understanding different cultures, right? And different cultures have different ways of communicating and different ways of receiving communicating. Then you marry that with the different types of learning styles. Some people like reading, some people like audio, some people like visual, some people like hands-on. The best approach is to start with what you know. Who are your stakeholders? Mm-hmm. What do they know? What do they not know? What motivates them? And then come up with a story of sharing that information to them. So a story you would share to a data scientist would be very different than a story you might share with someone who has an English background that is more of an emotional connection, as an example.
Yeah, it's one of those. I think sometimes in data and analytics, we're looking for an easy button, not necessarily an easy button or the solution that'll work across channels. And this is where the culture comes in, right? Like you were just saying, this is some audience members you're going to need to present in this way. Some you need to present that way. Here's a prime example. I shared this with Kevin and the team yesterday, but I was meeting with an executive, the CEO of a data science company, and I asked him, how many data scientists would you have present to your board or your executive team? And he just stuck his hand up and went like this, 0. I don't think it's that drastic, right? I think that some data scientists have strong communication ability.
Absolutely.
The problem is that's not what they were trained to do. So you get data storytellers, communicators, but there needs to be a library of tools, right? You have to have, some people are going to be presentation focused, some video focused. Executives, it might be, they can only pull it up on their phone real quick, right? And we have to balance how to make that happen throughout. Here's an interesting one from Raphael. I can answer the data literacy piece of this, Tim, but I'd love to get your thoughts on the first steps. How to start the data literacy process through all the company, right? And what are the first steps to becoming a data-driven organization? Why don't you take the second half, and maybe in the data literacy guy, I'd be happy to take the first half.
Yeah, so again, data-driven, I might say data-informed. Yeah. For purposes of today, use them as synonyms. But I would say start at the bottom, again, downstream. You need to have a data strategy. You need to have an analytics strategy. You need to have a decision-making process that is both systemic and systematic. We have one process we cover in the book. It's a 12-step methodology from asking the right questions, sourcing the right data, all the way to applying and balancing the gut decisions and the data insights, and then evaluating those decisions. It doesn't have to be that methodology. It just has to be a proven, sound, communicated methodology for going from data to wisdom. But it needs to not just include data and analytics. It needs to include those soft skills of getting a diverse perspective, thinking systemically, challenging assumptions, and communicating out to all stakeholders. You might have the right answer, but if you can't get everyone on board with the change by communicating properly to them, it's failed before it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that happens in data and analytics, what are the first steps to being data-driven, data-informed? It has to be strategy. I think that gets lost so often with organizations. Like, they know they need to be throwing money at data. Here's a prime example. I was with Qlik's Chief Technology Officer, Mike Potter, last year, meeting with a bunch of analysts, and he said he was meeting with an executive who told him, we're investing in data. We're not sure why. Someone's going to use it. Horrible way to start to become a data-driven and data-informed company. Even with data literacy. So Raphael, you asked, how do you start the data literacy process? What are the first steps to being data-driven? The reality is it's the same. You start with the strategy. If you have a strategy in place, it enables you to then layer in what things need to happen to make that strategy happen. Here's kind of one of those from LinkedIn user. This is kind of a loaded one, Kevin, and I think your book touches upon this well, but it says, how can executives ensure their organizations are leveraging data to enhance business value? Very loaded, but I think your book does a good job of teaching this. Data is something that could be an asset for wisdom. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, it all comes back to the verb action, right? Everything needs to be actionable. So starting with making sure you're asking the right questions, turning business questions into analytic questions, making sure those analytic questions, just like you have objectives in workplace that are SMART objectives, these analytic questions have to have defined scopes, but they have to also be actionable, meaning that there needs to be a clearly defined process of what we're going to be doing with it. Is it performance improvement? How often are we going to monitor it? And then it does go back to the organizational culture, starting from the top, highlighting this is what we're going to do with data. One example we use in the book is from Jeff Bezos from Amazon. He highlights, one of the most innovative companies in the world. they are never going to have enough data to be 100% certain on what to do. His level is different than everyone else's. They have their own. His is between 60 and 70%. They'll drive action with it, but they'll put a process in that assesses the outcomes, and they'll constantly tinker with it and improve as needed. And I think that's the right mindset to have, because if we wait till 100%, we're not going to be able to action on it.
No, and I think that's one of the things with data, to be data driven, data literacy, all these things. We have to understand that failure is not a bad thing. Failure is actually a part of data and analytical processes, right? I love to turn to sports. How often are we shocked when a team upsets the favored team? We're not. Statistically, though, it shouldn't have happened. In data and analytics in the business sense, though, we're not happy if the underdog wins, right? If we have a probability of 80% of this happening, we pull the lever in the business end, it doesn't work. Well, we didn't think when we saw 80% that, well, 1 out of 5 times it's not going to work. And if 1 out of 5 times comes, that's a problem. So tying back to some of these things, I really love the question, and it's a big one with a lot of open-endedness, but this one comes from me. Like when an organization is trying to turn data into wisdom, they have roadblocks. What do you define as some of those key roadblocks for our listeners that they would then be able to say, this is how we can overcome it? What are those key roadblocks?
Yeah, biggest one that I see all the time is being in a meeting that has a decision and you're not balancing data and experience. I mean, it comes to that, right? You're either blindly using data and running with it, and those roadblocks don't necessarily seem like a roadblock up front because you are moving forward, but you will hit a roadblock eventually. Or vice versa, is saying, I don't trust my data, so I'm only going to make gut-based or intuition-based decisions, not backed by the data. You might not hit that roadblock right away, but you're going to hit it. And as we've been talking about the whole time, all of this comes back to a organizational culture that supports this process and this framework and allows people to fail, just learn from it and fail quickly.
Yeah, to me, the number one roadblock when a company asks me, without fail, culture. I mean, it boils right down to, is your culture ready to do this? So Anela asks a really good question. We talked about that first step of having a strategy, but what is the next step after you define a clear strategy and governance model, right? If you want to become data driven, I have thoughts, but want to hear yours.
Well, I guess another way to paraphrase the question, if I'm hearing it correctly, is what's a good way to get started, maybe in grow from it? I don't think you want to try to build everything all at once because it's a massive undertaking. You want to do continuous improvement. So one thing that I do recommend, and we talked about a little bit in the book, is trying to make sure you're building a proper measurement framework to make sure you're using data to drive one aspect of your organizational strategy. So you build out a measurement framework, you ask the right questions, you tie them to inputs and outputs. In the book, we recommend using a logic model to define what those inputs and expected outputs are. Those turn into leading and lagging indicators, key performance indicators that get put on the measurement framework. You define what the thresholds for those KPIs are. You define how they're going to be reported out. And then you start that process and you communicate it to all of the shareholders with hope there. And in following the right process, you get a defined output that says, here's the state of this project as it relates to my strategy. Here's where we are. Here's where we should be. And then you've already built the logic model, which helps you understand systemically what's feeding into those lagging indicators, and you can look at root cause analysis. You get one win that way, and it would be amazing how quick other organizations want to start root cause analysis, logic models, and measurement frameworks.
I love it. Like, people ask me, what can I do to get people on board? Make an outcome-based approach. Define an outcome, do what you just said, and have an outcome. The other thing that I always tell them, if you're trying to be more data-driven, you have that strategy, you need to assess your organization, not just from a data literacy perspective, but from a capabilities perspective. Do you have the tools and things in place? For far too long, the tool was seen as the strategy. Tools should never be seen as the strategy. They're an enabler of the strategy. And so I think that that's the things that we need to put in place. So I don't miss this question from Jose, and we only have a few minutes left. Kevin, is your book already available? I want to make sure we get that out there before I lose it.
Yes, it is. There is a website, turningdataintowisdom.com, or just my website, kevinhanegan.com. You can sign up to the list there. You've been notified when it goes live on Amazon. Fingers crossed, it's going to be next week.
Fantastic, thanks. Excuse me. Constantine is asking, he deals with it in a specific question. But I'm going to dovetail this into a bigger one. Qlik Sense is a self-service tool. Our management question is, do we still need an analyst on our team to do all the work which he used to do in QlikView? Is this the end of the data analyst? I want to make this question the broad one. What will become of data analysts as AI, embedded analytics, and all these things come forward? I have a very specific answer for this, and I want to get yours, and then I'll dovetail into mine.
Yeah, well, we talk a lot in Qlik about augmented intelligence and insights, but there's always a human element to make sure that we're asking the right questions of the data. So there's all the tools will continue to get better and better to help us gain those insights, but we need the human element to A, make sure those insights are answering the question we really need to be asked, and B, to understand if there's other symptoms or a systemic perspective that we're not aware of, which are driving those insights that we saw. That will never go away.
Yeah, to me, this question, I was in South Africa presenting to a team once, and they said, isn't all this stuff, all this technology, self-service, is it making us lazy or complacent? And this is asking, does it replace them? My answer is always this. Let's say it used to take a data analyst 3 hours just to build something. And now in Qlik Sense or embedded analytics, augmented intelligence, et cetera, it takes 15 minutes. You now have 2 hours and 45 minutes of actual analyzing the data and information work. Whereas before it might have been the minutia of just building it. Now you can actually analyze it for the insight. And this is why turning data into wisdom is so dang important at this point, is if the analyst does not know how to do that, if they're not confident in turning data into wisdom and data literacy skills, then once that tool does build the chart for you in 15 minutes versus 3 hours, then 2 hours and 45 minutes, what is that analyst doing? This is why we need culture, we need the holistic approach and everything. I love the question because I do think there's a big fear these things are going away.
Absolutely.
But they're not. This should enhance them and make them better.
One more point on that, Jordan.
Yeah.
If I may, to that point too, in the older days, decades ago, even a couple of years ago, the data analyst, to your point, would spend a lot of time building out the visualizations. Now, in this third generation of business intelligence, it's all done quickly for them, which opens the door to more self-service data analysts. They don't need the skills to build the visualizations and the connections hand by hand. The tool will do that for them. They need to make the connections of the insights to what's the business question. So we're opening the door to a new world of data analysts that don't have to do all of the drawing by hand, but they still have to do the thinking.
This is why we talk about soft skills so much. They need to do the thinking. Rob Manley said it, a data analyst will answer questions you didn't think to ask, right? This is the soft skills. This is the ability to think deeply, make the connections between the business and what you're asking and what the tool made forward for it. Like, we can't rely on thinking technical. This is where those soft skills really come into play. So sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We only have a minute or two left here. But Kevin, any last thoughts, any last words on turning data into wisdom? Then I'll shut us down and tell people where they can connect with us.
Yeah, I guess just from a call to action, we're talking a lot about organizations and how executives can drive this. I think all of us make decisions with data today. I mean, that's the whole purpose of self-service analytics. And even as consumers of information, our households, we all do this. So I would encourage everyone to go back and take a step back. And when they see a data point, don't just blindly assume it, but start asking yourselves questions. How could that number be that number? What could have influenced that number? What other factors could be present that could change that? Start doing it in your home and your finances and whatever, and then start applying to the business, and then slowly build into, you'll have that aha moment.
Yeah, this is not, I think people also forget, data to wisdom, data literacy, all these things. This is not just for your career. This is for your life, right? We're all dealing with a crisis right now that requires us to be able to make smarter decisions with data. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and especially Kevin. I love chatting with him. He's a great friend and colleague of mine here. Where can they connect with you, Kevin? Where can they find the book? And you have to mention Twitter, because that was, I thought, a certain location had frozen over when you told me you got on Twitter.
Twitter. Yep. So Twitter handle is Kevin Hanegan, or the book is just kevinhanegan.com, or turningdataintowisdom.com. You can sign up now and be notified when it goes live next week.
Awesome. And connect with them on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I know we didn't get to every question, but please, we're open books. We love to talk about this stuff if you can't tell. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, his website, my website, chiefnerdofficer.com. And with that, I just want to say thanks to Kevin, to Qlik, for giving us this forum and opportunity. And hopefully we'll be able to chat with everybody and connect with you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.